woke up and the life you were living didn't feel like yours anymore. Maybe something happened. A death, an ending, a birthday that arrived like a quiet verdict. Maybe nothing happened at all, and that was worse. Everything was objectively fine. The job, the apartment, the routine, the people, fine. And yet something underneath all of it had shifted, and you couldn't name it, and you couldn't unfeel it. A hollowness that didn't respond to the usual remedies. A question that kept surfacing no matter how busy you stayed. What is the point of any of this? You probably told yourself it would pass. Then it didn't. And now you're here, somewhere between confused and frightened, wondering if something is fundamentally broken inside you. Here is the first thing you need to hear. Nothing is broken. What is happening to you has a name, and that name is not depression, not burnout, not a nervous breakdown. It is an existential crisis, and the difference matters more than you think. Irvin Yalom spent over 60 years as a psychiatrist, sitting with people in exactly this kind of pain. Not the pain of trauma or chemical imbalance, but the pain of a person who has, for the first time, looked directly at the conditions of their own existence and found no comfortable place to hide. What he discovered, and what took most of his patients completely by surprise, is that the crisis itself is not the enemy. It is the first honest moment many people have ever had. Your defenses collapsed, the routine, the goals, the quiet busyness that kept the hard questions at a safe distance. It stopped working. And now, the questions are here, and they are not leaving. Yalom would tell you that this is not a malfunction. This is a confrontation with death, with freedom, with the terrifying absence of a predetermined meaning that every human being will face eventually. Most people spend their entire lives engineering ways to avoid it. You don't have that option anymore. That is not a disaster. It is, if you are willing to move through it rather than away from it, the most important thing that has ever happened to you. This video will not tell you how to make the crisis go away. It will show you how to walk through it, step by step, and what becomes possible on the other side. But I need to warn you, the path through is not comfortable. Yalom never promised comfort. What he promised was something rarer, the chance to stop living a life you never consciously chose and start building one you can actually claim as your own. If you're ready for that, stay with me. The crisis didn't come out of nowhere. You just weren't supposed to see what was underneath. For most of your life, your mind has been doing something remarkably sophisticated, keeping certain truths at a manageable distance, not through stupidity or denial in the crude sense, but through the sheer machinery of a lived life. Goals to pursue, routines to maintain, roles to perform, other people's expectations to meet. The accumulated busyness of existence functions, among other things, as a very effective system for not thinking about certain things. And for years, maybe decades, it worked. Then it stopped. And what was underneath is now visible. Yalom identified 4 truths. He called them the ultimate concerns, the givens of existence, that every human being carries but most spend their lives avoiding. They are not philosophical abstractions. They are the actual load-bearing conditions of what it means to be alive. And your crisis, whatever triggered it, is almost certainly a confrontation with one or more of them. The first is death, not as a concept, as a personal, irreversible, biological fact. You are going to die. Everyone you love is going to die. The time you have is not expandable. You know this intellectually, of course. You've always known it. But knowing it intellectually and feeling it, really feeling it, in a way that changes how you move through a Tuesday afternoon, are entirely different things. Most people manage to keep it intellectual their entire lives, until they can't. The second is freedom, and not the pleasant kind. Yalom means something specific and unsettling, There is no predetermined script for your life. No cosmic authority assigned you a purpose. No path was laid out for you before you arrived. You are radically, inescapably free to construct your own existence and radically, inescapably responsible for what you construct. That responsibility is heavier than most people are willing to hold, so they outsource it to expectations, to convention, to what their parents wanted, to what people like them are supposed to do. It works until it doesn't. The third is existential isolation. This one is quieter, but it cuts deep. You are alone inside your own experience in a way that cannot be fully bridged. No matter how much someone loves you, no matter how well they know you, they cannot follow you all the way inside. The core of your subjective experience, what it actually feels like to be you, in this body, with this history, facing these particular fears, that is yours alone. People sense this and spend enormous energy trying to escape it, through relationships, through belonging, through the constant presence of other people. It helps. It does not solve it. The fourth is meaninglessness. The universe does not come with a built-in purpose. You are not born with a mission pre-installed. The meaning you've been living by, the values, the goals, the sense of what matters and why, was constructed by you, by your culture, by the people who raised you, by the stories you absorbed before you were old enough to question them. And when the machinery breaks down, that constructed meaning can feel suddenly thin, arbitrary. Like a set of rules for a game you're no longer sure you want to play. These four truths are what your crisis is made of. Name them. Sit with the discomfort of recognizing yourself in them. Because naming them is not just an intellectual exercise, it is the first act of navigation. You cannot find your way through something you refuse to look at directly. The mind that has been hiding these truths from you was not malicious. It was protecting you. But protection has a cost. And the cost, paid quietly over years, is a life lived at a slight remove from itself. Functional, perhaps even successful, but not fully inhabited. Not fully yours. The crisis cracked that open. What you do next determines everything. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. The first thing you did when the crisis hit was try to make it stop. That's the wrong move, and it's costing you more than you realize. Not because seeking relief is irrational, it isn't. The pain of an existential crisis is real, and the impulse to escape it is deeply human. But watch what happens when you follow that impulse. You get busier. You restructure your schedule, take on new projects, fill the silence with noise. Or you go the other direction. You withdraw, you numb, you find something to consume that keeps the questions at bay for a few hours. You might even go to a doctor and walk out with a prescription, treating an existential confrontation as if it were a serotonin deficiency. And for a while, it works. The edge softens, the questions quiet down. Then they come back, louder. Yalom was direct about this. The attempt to eliminate existential anxiety, rather than engage with it, is one of the most reliable ways to deepen it. Because anxiety is not a malfunction. It is a signal. It is your existence demanding to be examined. And every time you successfully suppress that signal, you are not solving the problem. You are deferring it with interest. Think about what suppression actually costs you over time. Every defense you build against the ultimate concerns requires maintenance. The busyness has to stay busy. The distraction has to keep distracting. The relationship has to keep filling the silence. You are not living, you are managing. And management is exhausting in a way that is very difficult to explain to someone who hasn't felt it, because from the outside, everything looks fine. The exhaustion isn't from what you're doing, it's from what you're holding back. So the first step, and Yalom is unambiguous about this, is to stop. Not to wallow, not to surrender to despair, but to consciously, deliberately stop running and turn around to face what is there. This sounds simple. It is one of the hardest things a person can do. What does it actually mean in practice? It means resisting the reflex to immediately problem-solve the crisis. It means sitting with the discomfort long enough to ask what, specifically, you are confronting. Is this the fear of death? Your own mortality surfacing in a way you can no longer intellectualize away? Is this the weight of freedom? The realization that the life you're living was never fully chosen and that choosing is now unavoidable? Is this the loneliness of isolation? The sense that despite everything and everyone around you, something fundamental cannot be shared? Is this the vertigo of meaninglessness? The feeling that the framework you were using to make sense of your life has quietly stopped holding? Name it. As precisely as you can. Not because naming it makes it disappear, but because named things can be worked with. Unnamed things just haunt you. Yalom observed that the moment a patient could clearly identify which existential concern was at the center of their crisis, something shifted. Not relief, not yet, but orientation. The difference between being lost in a storm and knowing exactly which storm you're in. One is pure panic. The other, even in the same conditions, contains the beginning of agency. You're not trying to fix the crisis. You're trying to understand what it is actually about. That understanding is not the end of the process. It is the beginning of it. But nothing that comes after works without it. Stop running, turn around, look at it. What do you see? Everything you've been avoiding thinking about is the only thing that can help you now. Death is not the enemy of a meaningful life. It is the condition of one. And until you understand that, not intellectually, but in a way that actually changes how you move through your days, you will keep living as though you have unlimited time, which means you will keep deferring the things that actually matter, which means you will keep feeling the hollow dissatisfaction that brought you here in the first place. Yalom made an observation that stops people cold when they first encounter it. The anxiety you feel about death is almost never really about dying. It is about not having lived. The terror isn't the moment of ending. It's the possibility of arriving at that moment and realizing that the life behind you was spent managing, performing, deferring, that you were there for all of it and somehow missed it anyway. That fear is trying to tell you something. The question is whether you're willing to listen. Most people aren't. The mind has a remarkable capacity to acknowledge mortality in the abstract while living in complete defiance of it in practice. You know you will die. You have known this since childhood. And yet you act. We all act, as though the important things can wait. As though there will be a better time to have the hard conversation, to leave the wrong situation, to build the life that actually resembles what you want. The deferral feels reasonable at the moment. It always feels reasonable at the moment, and the moments accumulate. Yalom called this the awakening experience. The moment when the awareness of death breaks through the intellectual compartment and becomes visceral. A diagnosis, a funeral, a sudden 3 a.m. clarity that you are not exempt. These moments are brutal. They are also, he believed, among the most valuable experiences a person can have, because they do something that no amount of therapy or self-reflection can reliably do on its own. They make the stakes real. When the stakes are real, the noise falls away. The things you were worried about last week, the minor professional slight, the social performance, the low-grade anxiety about what people think of you, suddenly reveal themselves for what they are. Small, temporary, not worth the portion of your finite life you've been allocating to them. And something else becomes visible in that silence. What actually matters to you? Not what you've been told should matter, not what people like you are supposed to care about, but what, if you are genuinely honest, in the 3 a.m. clarity of someone who has just felt their own finitude, you would be devastated to leave unlived. This is the compass, not a metaphor, a practical tool. When you are lost in the noise of the crisis, when the questions feel too large and too many, you can return to this. Given that your time is limited and non-negotiable, what does that limitation clarify? What does it reveal as obviously important that you've been treating as optional? What does it reveal as obviously irrelevant that you've been treating as urgent? Yalom worked with terminally ill patients for much of his career. And he noticed something that disturbed and fascinated him in equal measure. The patients who were closest to death were often the ones most clearly able to see their lives. The proximity to the end had stripped away the noise, the performance, the accumulated weight of other people's expectations. What remained was remarkably clear. They knew what they wished they had done. They knew what they were glad they had done. And almost none of it had to do with achievement, status, or safety. You don't have to wait for a terminal diagnosis to access that clarity. That is Yalom's radical proposition. You can choose to live with the awareness of your finitude now, not as a morbid preoccupation, but as a clarifying lens, a way of asking, regularly and honestly, is what I'm doing with my time consistent with what actually matters to me? The crisis gave you a crack in the compartment. Don't seal it back up. Use it. Look at your life through the lens of your own mortality and ask the question you've been avoiding. What needs to change? There is a version of your life you've been living that you never fully chose. You know this. You've known it for longer than you're comfortable admitting. It didn't happen through malice or stupidity. It happened gradually, the way most important things happen. A path of least resistance followed long enough becomes a path. The expectations of parents, partners, institutions, culture, absorbed early enough, they stop feeling like external pressure and start feeling like your own desires. The job you took because it made sense. The relationship you stayed in because leaving was complicated. The version of yourself you perform in public so consistently that you sometimes forget it's a performance. None of it was chosen with full awareness. It accumulated. And at some point, the accumulated weight of unchosen things became the architecture of your life. Your crisis, in part, is the recognition of this. And recognition, Yalom understood, cuts both ways. On one side is the pain, the disorienting realization that significant portions of the life you've been living were built around other people's expectations, inherited scripts, and fear of what would happen if you deviated. That is a genuinely difficult thing to sit with. It implies loss. It implies that time was spent on something that wasn't fully yours. The mind resists this conclusion with considerable force, which is why most people never quite let themselves reach it. But on the other side of that same recognition is something Yalom considered one of the most powerful forces in human psychology: the awareness of your own authorship. If you built this life, even without full awareness, even under the influence of pressures you didn't choose, then you can build a different one. The same freedom that produced the unchosen life is the freedom that makes a chosen life possible. This is what Yalom meant by taking responsibility, not guilt, not self-flagellation over the years spent on the wrong path. Responsibility in the existential sense, the recognition that you are the author of your life. That authorship is non-transferable, and that it is active right now whether you acknowledge it or not. Because here is what happens when you refuse to own your authorship. You become a victim of your own existence. Not dramatically, quietly. You tolerate things you shouldn't tolerate because changing them would require admitting you chose them. You blame circumstances for the shape your life has taken because the alternative, accepting that you shaped it, feels unbearable. You wait for the right moment, for permission, for conditions to improve, for someone else to make the first move. And the waiting itself becomes a choice, one with consequences, one you will eventually have to account for. Yalom saw this pattern constantly. He called it the avoidance of responsibility, and he was precise about what it costs. Not just the obvious cost of a life unlived, the subtler cost of self-betrayal, the slow erosion of self-respect that comes from knowing, somewhere beneath the noise, that you are not living in accordance with what you actually value, that you are performing rather than inhabiting, that the gap between the life you have and the life you sense you could have is not due to circumstance. It's due to a series of choices to not choose. Owning your authorship means closing that gap. Not all at once. That is not how it works. But it starts with a specific, uncomfortable act, looking at your life as it actually is, without the protective narrative of circumstance and bad luck and not the right time, and asking honestly, what here did I choose? What am I still choosing? What would I choose differently if I were choosing with full awareness? These questions are not rhetorical. They require real answers. Sit with them long enough to get past the first layer of response, which will almost always be defensive, and into the second layer, which is where the truth lives. And then, this is the part most people stop short of. Let the answers mean something. Let them change something. Not everything at once, but something. One genuine choice, made with full awareness of your own authorship, is worth more than years of managed existence. The pen is in your hand. It has always been in your hand. What are you going to write? If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. At some point in the crisis, you ask the question. Maybe out loud, maybe only in the silence of 3 a.m. What is the point of any of this? And nothing was answered. That silence is not evidence that there is no point. It is evidence that you've been looking for meaning in the wrong place, waiting for it to arrive, to be revealed, to be handed to you by something outside yourself. A purpose you were born with, a calling that would make itself known if you were patient enough, or quiet enough, or finally living the right kind of life. You've been waiting for meaning the way people wait for a train, as though it runs on a schedule, and your only job is to be on the platform when it arrives. Yalom is unsparing about this. The universe does not have a built-in purpose. You were not born with a mission pre-installed. There is no cosmic script in which your role is written and waiting to be discovered. This is not nihilism. It is the condition of human freedom. And it is, once you stop fighting it, one of the most liberating truths you will ever encounter, because it means the question is not where is my meaning, but what meaning am I going to create? The distinction sounds subtle. It is everything. Waiting for meaning is passive. It positions you as a receiver, someone to whom significance will eventually be delivered. If only the conditions are right, if only you find the right path, the right relationship, the right work, it keeps you in a permanent state of not yet. And the not yet accumulates, quietly and expensively, into a life that feels perpetually provisional, almost real, almost yours, almost meaningful, pending the arrival of something that never quite comes. Creating meaning is active. It requires engagement, full, deliberate, sometimes uncomfortable engagement with the actual texture of your life. Yalom identified the primary sources of created meaning across decades of clinical work, and they are not complicated or exotic. Deep relationships in which you are genuinely known and genuinely know another. Work that connects to something you actually value, not just something that pays. Contribution, the sense that your presence in the world makes some difference to something beyond yourself. Creativity, love, the full inhabitation of your own experience, including the painful parts, rather than the management of it from a safe distance. These are not destinations, they are practices. Meaning is not a state you arrive at. It is something generated by how you engage, daily, with what is in front of you. And here is what makes this hard, and why most people don't do it. Creating meaning requires you to commit, to choose fully and without guarantee what matters to you, knowing that the choice is yours alone, knowing that it might be wrong, knowing that there is no external authority to validate it. The person waiting for meaning to be revealed is also, often unconsciously, waiting to be absolved of the responsibility of choosing. If the meaning comes from outside, then it isn't your fault if it's the wrong meaning. But if you create it, if you stand up and say, "This is what I value, this is what I'm building my life around," then you are exposed, fully responsible, no longer able to hide behind the not yet. That exposure is exactly what the crisis is pushing you toward. Yalom worked with patients who had, by conventional measures, everything: success, security, relationships, health, and still felt the hollowness you're feeling now. And in almost every case, the hollowness traced back to the same source. They were living around meaning rather than from it, making choices based on what was safe, what was approved of, what made sense on paper, while the things that actually generated vitality in them, the relationships, the work, the creative acts, the commitments that cost something, were being deferred, minimized, or quietly abandoned. The crisis is asking you to stop deferring, not to overhaul everything overnight, not to make grand gestures or dramatic pivots, but to identify, as honestly as you can, what actually generates meaning for you, what makes you feel that your time is being used for something real. And to begin, deliberately, and without waiting for permission, moving toward it. One relationship deepened. One piece of work that actually matters, pursued with real attention. One commitment made and kept, not because it was expected, but because you chose it. This is how meaning is built. Not discovered, not delivered. Built, slowly, deliberately, through the choices of a person who has stopped waiting and started authoring. The silence that answered your question is not the end of the conversation. It is the beginning of your answer. What are you going to build? You came into this looking for a way out of the pain. That's not what you found. What you found is harder and more valuable than that. You found a map of what the pain actually is. Not a malfunction, not a disease, not evidence that something in you is broken beyond repair. A confrontation with death, with freedom, with the irreducible aloneness of your own experience, with a universe that will not hand you a reason to get out of bed in the morning. These are not problems with solutions. They are the conditions of a human life. And the people who live most fully are not the ones who resolved these conditions. They are the ones who stopped pretending they didn't exist. That is what this crisis was trying to teach you. Not gently, because it couldn't afford to be gentle. You had been too good at not listening. Here is the hardest truth of everything you've heard today. The life you were living before the crisis, the managed life, the performed life, the life built around inherited expectations and the quiet avoidance of questions that had no comfortable answers. That life is gone. You cannot go back to it. Not really. You have seen too much. The compartments have been open too long. You know now what you were avoiding, and that knowledge does not unarrive. The only question is what you build in its place. Yalom spent 60 years watching people face this exact moment. And what he found, consistently, across thousands of hours of clinical work, is that the people who came through existential crisis transformed were not the ones who found the right answers. They were the ones who finally started asking the right questions, who stopped outsourcing the authorship of their lives and picked up the pen, who let the awareness of their mortality clarify rather than paralyze, who accepted that meaning would not be delivered and began imperfectly and without guarantee to create it. That is available to you, not as a promise, as a possibility. One that requires something from you that is genuinely difficult, the willingness to stay with the discomfort rather than engineer your way around it, to let the crisis complete its work rather than shutting it down prematurely, to take the questions seriously enough to let them change you. You will not do this perfectly. Nobody does. You will rebuild some of the old walls before you catch yourself. You will defer things you know you shouldn't defer. You will lose the thread and have to find it again. This is not failure. It is the actual texture of the process. What matters is not that you do it without stumbling. What matters is that you do it with your eyes open. The existential crisis is not the end of something. It is the end of a particular kind of sleep. And what comes after, if you're willing to do the work, is not happiness in the uncomplicated sense. It is something better than that. A life that is actually yours. Chosen, inhabited, imperfect, finite, and fully alive. That is what was on the other side of the questions you were afraid to ask. Now you know what they are. Now you know what they are asking of you. The rest is yours to write. If this video gave you something real to sit with, leave a comment. Tell me which of these 4 confrontations hit closest to home. Your answer might be exactly what someone else needs to read. Share this with someone who is in the middle of their own crisis and doesn't yet have the language for what they're going through. And if you want to keep going deeper into the psychology of how we actually live and how we could, subscribe. This channel exists for the people who are done with comfortable answers.